In October of 2019, Mark Emmert said that the California Fair Pay to Play Act was an existential threat to the NCAA. And he said that this is going to make players professionals. He said in a lawsuit that if you endorse products, you're just a shill. And now they've turned around and said this and endorsed this. And it makes you wonder, like, why have you tried to die on this hill for all these years? Why have you wasted all this time and money? There's no principle involved here, none. And on that regard, I think it's really sort of sad for the NCAA that they've fought this for so long.
Now, this will, of course, impact sports across the board, and we've got two of them represented here with guys from huge programs. Ryan Clark played football at LSU, Bobby Carpenter at Ohio State, and Jay Williams, of course, played your basketball at Duke. And so, Jay, I'll just start there. You heard what Jay Bilas said, and you heard what Mark Emmert said. What are your thoughts this morning?
Greeny, it's like, hey, I'm really glad that the NCAA finally got to the dance, but it's the last dance. It's the last dance. Like, this dance is about to be over already, and there's so many layers of oversight that I don't know how you actually enforce it, Greeny. Like, one of those layers of oversight, I actually have my legal pad here. NCAA doesn't want endorsements to help recruiting. How do you actually enforce that? How are you going to work with small business owners to enforce and not label them as boosters? And then they say there's no cap on the amount of money that players can actually earn, but it said to ensure that compensation provided, it's relative to activity. I don't know what relative to activity actually means. And so it's like, can activity mean if you're a high school, you're a big time star, like you can cap more? There's so much oversight here that there's no way that they can enforce it. And that's why I said, like, they're late to the game. And I understand that they're trying to be malleable, but now it just feels like they're always going to be playing catch up and the game's going to surpass them. I said this a while ago. I thought this was, back in the day when all this stuff started to happen and we started seeing players go overseas, I was in and there saying that this is going to become the new norm. And I thought this was the end of the NCAA. And I think now we're starting to see that. Will they survive? Of course. But I don't think they're going to get the big caliber name in sports. I think there's going to be alternative options.
All right, so we always associate that with basketball, but this will, at least could, have an enormous impact on football as well. Bobby, what do you think?
And it's interesting just listening to what Jay said. Like, this took a generational global pandemic, I almost feel like, for the NCAA to finally push this over and kind of get on the right side of where everything was going. And, one of the things you heard about in the release is they're talking about how this would be able to provide relief during this difficult time, financially, different schools to help some of the student athletes. Well, it doesn't go into effect until 2021. And that's if it gets pushed all the way through. There's a lot of gray area to this. There's going to be multiple levels of compliance. It's going to be pushed back onto the schools. And I'm not really sure how they're going to navigate this whole thing. And so that's really the interesting piece, like, to kind of dovetail off Jay. Like, they're trying to push this through. They're behind it. They're opening it up, but there's really not a lot of answers in it outside of what everybody wants to hear is now people will be able to go out and market themselves and receive what they deem to be fair market value for their likeness.
Maybe they're trying to continue to control something that isn't really controllable. Ryan Clark, you're not only, of course, a former athlete, but you are the father of an NCAA student athlete. So what is your take here?
Well, I think the timing is not mysterious, right? You're hearing all of this news about the NCAA and whether or not sports can survive. Can these universities survive? And so now they come out and they make some more news. You're also hearing about people deciding to not even play college basketball, whether it's the G League or go overseas. And so what the NCAA has shown us that they'll do is they'll maintain control until forced to relinquish it. And that's what's happening now. When you listen to Jay talk about some of the oversight that's going to have to come into play in order for this to be viable, that's because they weren't planning on doing this. This isn't something that the NCAA truly wants to be behind, but they have been forced into. And so for me, I think this is a start, but I don't know if they will ever be at the point or the level that will be needed to compete with some of these other entities because they started so late and they fought it so long. And I agree with Jay Bilas. There was no principle behind fighting it other than control, and now they find themselves in a situation that I don't think they ever get out of.
So Jay, Will, to come back to you,
and Greeny, think about this too, Greeny, for a second. I was going to say, think about this for a second, Greeny, too, and Bobby and Ryan, especially with you guys in football. You guys are going to be the first at this, okay? So you're dealing with this. You're trying to implement this right now with all this new legislation, all this new enforcement strategies that you're trying to put together out of thin air in order to react, right? on top of that, what happens if we actually don't have fans that attend football games this season? Then you don't have football, right? Then what you're going to see is a decrease of D1 sports, Greeny. D1, it affects Title IX because football and basketball subsidize a lot of other sports throughout the school. So look, this is just a beginning of a slew of issues for the NCAA that, once again, they're reactive. If they have been proactive in planning this stuff, this would have already been in place to help carry that issue that they're going to have in this current season coming up.
Well, Bobby, one of the things that I think has happened here is so much conversation on this show and others about just how important the money that football generates has made it very difficult to try and argue that this isn't a business. And at some point, I think that even the NCAA cannot continue to carry that out.
No, they just kind of finally pulled their head out of the sand a little bit. And one of the other interesting pieces that came out with this announcement with the NCAA is, the players aren't going to be allowed to have any university marks on them, which is understandable. But I began to think about this. Like, this happens in the NFL all the time. I mean, you have your sponsorships with the NFL, guys or players, and if they marry those two things together, they're allowed to do it. Part of the reason I think the NCAA, Greeny, is like, they don't also want some of the players chewing into the university's profits for some of these different marketing deals that have become so rich to help finance all of these things, because the money from football especially drives all the other sports. And without it, college athletics, as we know, I think will begin to cease to exist.
We're going to